How's it going, everybody? Swagkage here, and welcome to today's video. Got another versus matchup for everybody. It's one that's been requested like a billion times. Everybody's been asking for Minato versus Pain for as long as I can remember, and in the past, I never found this battle that intriguing. I looked at it and I was like, that wouldn't be that cool. Nobody would watch a video about that, and I'm kicking myself right now because I thought about it more today, and I asked myself, why didn't I like this? This would have been an awesome fight to see, and it's one that I definitely like talking about, so that's what we're going to be doing today. Now, I've talked about Pain in mini versus videos in the past, but the way he interacts with Minato is much different than how he interacts with many of his other potential opponents. With most other people, he has a handful of attacks that can just end the fight immediately, like Chibaku Tensei and Chaotic Shinra Tensei, and stuff like that won't be super effective against Minato because the guy can teleport. Depending on the range they're used from, both Chaotic Shinra Tensei and Chibaku Tensei can take a long time to hit their target, plenty of time for Minato to warp away from the battlefield and then come back. By the time he returned, the 6 Paths of Pain would be noticeably weaker due to Nagato's severely cut chakra supply, and the rest of the fight would be a lot easier for him as a result. The Paths of Pain can't be as aggressive against Minato as they can against many other people. He's one of the fastest ninja to have ever lived, and with that comes being incredibly slippery and hard to hit. One thing that's interesting about this battle, though, is while the Flying Thunder God Jutsu will be problematic for Nagato to deal with, one thing he could easily do to combat it is use the gravitational abilities of the Diva Path to change the positions and locations of Minato's Raijin kunai. Bancho Tenin can pull the kunai out of place, and Shinra Tensei can launch them to different locations throughout the battlefield. These dynamics are pretty important, and they're worth taking into account when discussing other aspects of the fight, which I'll start doing right now. So to keep things simple, I won't be taking Sage Mode or KCM into account at the beginning here. I'll get to them later, but for now this is base Minato versus the 6 Paths of Pain. Comparing him to Naruto, he's essentially a stronger version of him with the Flying Thunder God Jutsu instead of the Rasen Shuriken. While the Rasen Shuriken is obviously really strong, Flying Raijin is a lot more useful in a fight against Pain, mostly because Minato can use it over and over, whereas Naruto was only able to use it a handful of times when he fought Pain. It also can't be absorbed by the Predapath, obviously, and since it isn't a massive moving projectile, it's a lot harder to track. As for everything else in Minato's arsenal, like Naruto, he's a master user of both the Shadow Clone Jutsu and the Rasengan, and it's shown that he's capable of summoning Gamabunta. Something else worth taking into consideration is his ability to summon the Shinigami, and while this may initially seem worthless since stealing the soul of any of the Paths of Pain would do nothing to Nagato, I'll get into how it might be really useful later in the video. As I've said in previous videos of mine, Pain's arsenal is both vast and versatile, but I think the most important ability he has here is the shared vision present between the 6 paths. This will allow him to monitor Minato's teleportation far more effectively than anyone without the Rinnegan possibly could, with the exception of maybe Sage Mode users and Sensory type ninja, thanks to the fact that as long as just one of the 6 paths sees where Minato ends up, all of them will be safe from a surprise attack or ambush. Now, whether or not they'll actually be able to react to him is a completely different story. As I've said, Minato is incredibly fast, one of the fastest ninja to have ever lived, and not that the Paths of Pain are slow, but they're definitely not as fast as Minato is. What's more, they won't just have one of him to deal with. Like I said, he's very good at using the Shadow Clone Jutsu, so with enough planning and the right approach, Minato and a horde of his clones could easily overwhelm the 6 Paths of Pain with their speed alone. Now that said, Pain also has a lot of ways that he can disrupt Minato during combat. The Animal Path can bring in enough summons to pose a pretty serious threat to Minato, and as it summons more animals, the field of vision shared by the paths and the summons of the Animal Path will continue to grow. The Diva Path can use Shinra Tensei to defend itself from clones and Bancho Tenin to interrupt any clones attempting to attack one of the other paths. The Preda Path can absorb the Rasengan if Minato or one of his clones attempts to hit it with one, and the Asura Path can cause a whole bunch of problems with all of its crazy weapons and equipment. As is usually the case with Pain, a factor that could heavily affect the outcome of the fight is its location. The paths are at their strongest when in the Rain Village, so if Minato fights Pain there, he'll be in for a lot of trouble, especially because the usual handicap that the paths would have, wherein the Diva Path wouldn't be able to use Chibaku Tensei or Chaotic Shinra Tensei for fear of destroying the Rain Village, wouldn't really matter because neither one would be very effective against Minato anyway. On the other hand, if Minato fought Pain in the Leaf Village, not only would the paths not be at their strongest, but Minato would also have access to a whole bunch of teleportation points, thanks to the fact that it's very likely he laid out various kunai throughout the village and perhaps marked many of Konoha's landmarks with Flying Raijin seals. The last thing I want to discuss before I talk about how I feel the fight would play out is the importance of intel. Not necessarily in determining the outcome, but rather in determining how each fighter would interact with one another. The series very clearly implies that fighting against Pain without knowing what he's capable of is a lot more dangerous than coming prepared. Of course, this idea doesn't apply to Pain exclusively, but it's specifically true in his case because of how weird the toolkit provided by the Rinnegan is. If Minato goes into the fight blind, blind, he's gonna have a really hard time trying to figure out what's going on, just like Jiraiya did. Even when taking into consideration how smart he is, the Rinnegan's powers are numerous and bizarre, so it's inevitable that he's gonna get caught off guard a handful of times before he finally gets a grasp on what Pain can do. On the other hand, whether Nagato comes prepared or not is also pretty important. It won't make as much of a difference as the intel Minato may or may not have, but it'd still be a pretty major factor. If Nagato goes in blind, he will without a doubt be caught off guard by Minato's ability to teleport, and at least one or two of the paths may go down as a result. If he knows what to expect, however, all he'd have to do is get an idea of how fast Minato is before he'd be able to use the shared vision of the Paths of Pain to create a pretty solid, coordinated defense against any of his opponent's attempts to blitz him through teleportation. Now, realistically, it's pretty hard to think of a scenario where both of them end up fighting one another, because there's only like a brief 1 year-ish window where Nagato is crippled and currently using the 6 Paths of Pain, and Minato is also still alive. Now, if they were to fight somewhere within this time period, neither of them would really know anything about the other. Pain might have some surface-level knowledge of Minato's abilities thanks to some tips from Obito, but I find that unlikely because for Minato to be alive, he and Obito could not have fought yet, and it'd be a bit hard for Obito to sell the whole Madara shtick if he went to Pain and said, yeah, I know what Minato can do, he used to be my teacher. Now, of course, he could say something along the lines of, oh, he's Konoha's famed Yellow Flash, everybody knows he can teleport, be careful if you fight him, but I can't see any reason for him to bring that up unless he knew that Nagato would end up fighting Minato at some point. Another thing I should mention is if they did fight in this time frame, it'd probably be a lot easier for Minato because Nagato probably wouldn't be as experienced with controlling the paths using the Rinnegan. But for the sake of fairness, I'll just say that doesn't apply. This is Prime Minato versus Prime 6 Paths of Pain. Nagato is just as skilled at controlling them as he was against Jiraiya and the rest of the Leaf Village, and Minato is at his most powerful. So if this fight did end up going down, and it took place in the time frame that I specified, it would be either A, in the Rain Village, because Minato was given some reason to travel there, perhaps to investigate. I mean, I don't think it's too unlikely for rumors to start spreading about a boy with the Rinnegan causing an uprising in the Rain Village that led to a civil war there between Hanzo and the Akatsuki. Jiraiya could even give Minato a tip before he leaves, something like, I used to be that boy's teacher. The stories about the Rinnegan are true. Or B, it would take place in the Leaf Village, probably because Obito wants Nagato to travel there in his place, maybe even to get a glimpse of the power of the Rinnegan, but most importantly, of course, for the capture of Kushina. This would obviously catch Minato's attention, and the two would end up fighting. If they were to fight in the Rain Village, I think it's reasonable to say that both of them would be going into the fight completely blind. Neither would have any insight into the other's abilities, but if they were to fight in the Leaf Village, Pain would have, like I said, surface-level knowledge of Minato's abilities, such as the fact that he can teleport and maybe use the Rasengan or whatever, but aside from that, he wouldn't know too much. In the Rain Village, his lack of knowledge would be offset by the power boost he receives from fighting there, and in the Leaf Village, his possession of knowledge would be offset by Minato's home field advantage, which I discussed earlier, and the fact that the paths would be weaker than they would when fighting in the Rain Village. So, now that we've finally laid everything out, let's get into talking about how the fight would go down. The beginning would be pretty crazy to say the very least. The two would be playing 4D chess against each other, trying to figure out what their opponent is capable of and how they can exploit any weaknesses that show themselves. However, in both locations, Minato would be able to gather information much more effectively than Pain could, thanks to the hit-and-run tactics he'd be able to make use of with teleportation. In the Leaf Village, he'd have access to far too many vantage points for Pain to be able to consistently cut him off. And in the Rain Village, he'd at least initially have the element of surprise provided by the fact that Pain has no idea who he's fighting against. And though this may be a bold claim, I honestly think that this alone will be enough to win Minato the fight. Even though it may take a while, he will eventually see everything the paths can dish out. And when that happens, he basically wins. Once Pain loses the element of surprise, there's practically nothing he can do that Minato can't react to, especially when considering his ability to use shadow clones. The Naraka path, which can repair the damage sustained by the other 5 paths of Pain, is shown to be not very durable at all. It was almost destroyed by a single Rasengan from Konohamaru, and since Minato is obviously much more powerful than Konohamaru, I imagine that one of his Rasengan would probably do the job completely. And once he gets rid of that one, though I do acknowledge the Paths of Pain are strong, it's just a matter of time before he takes care of the rest. This is especially true if we take Sage Mode into consideration, and even though Minato claims that he's not very good at using Senjutsu, immediately after he did, he closed his eyes for like 2 seconds, opened them back up, and suddenly he was in perfect Sage mode. His Senjutsu can't be that bad, and if he uses it against Pain, I'm pretty sure it's an easy win for him. One thing I briefly mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure if it's relevant, is Minato's ability to summon the Shinigami. Now, this might not have any effect on the fight whatsoever, but I wanted to bring it up because I think the way it could be used in this fight is pretty interesting. When Hiruzen fought Orochimaru, he had Shadow Clones summon the Shinigami to seal the souls of the reincarnated first and second Hokage. Now, Minato couldn't do this to the Six Paths of Pain because they're not Edo Tensei. They don't have a soul for the Reaper to steal. They're just corpses that Nagato transmits chakra through. But it may be possible, although it isn't likely, for Minato to sever the connection between Nagato and the Paths with the Reaper, and even if he can't do that, he'll definitely discover that the Paths of Pain don't have a soul to steal, and from that he may be able to extrapolate that they're being controlled by an outside force. I won't talk about KCM since 1, I'm pretty sure the outcome is fairly obvious, and 2, using Edo Minato against the Paths of Pain isn't fair. I think it'd be more fair to pit him up against Edo Nagato, and that's a much tougher fight to decide, so if you guys want me to talk about it, I may make a video about it in the future. For now, that should be all though, so as always, thank you guys for watching the video all the way to the end. If you have any suggestions or you want to leave your thoughts on the video, make sure to do that in the comments below. Make sure you have a great rest of the day, and until my next video, I'll talk to you later. Swagkage out. Bye.